since it's 6 p.m., we're going to go ahead and get this conversation started. I'm sure more will join on as we get going. But for those of you that are here, we just want to welcome everybody. We're really, really excited to have our heavy hitters. I'm going to call you that in the industry. We're really, really grateful for them taking some time out of their day to share with us kind of their insights and their experience with what's happening with tariffs right now. As you know, it's kind of a big topic, a big concern, especially at the supplier level. But we do want to talk about how that could trickle down, how that is and will trickle down to our artisans and craftsmen, and how we can help hopefully give them some insights and some narrative and some tools to combat these conversations at the consumer level as well. So just for some quick introductions for our community, we have with us Braydan Shaw, owner and president of Burns 1876. We have Marshall Baird, who's the Senior VP of Digital and Chief Information Officer at Weaver Leather. We've got Drew Gulick, who's president. Did I say that right, Drew? Your last name? Cool.
Yep, you did it.
Woo,
Yeah.
that's good. President of Hermann Oak Leather, and Adam Love, who's the sales manager at Hermann Oak. I didn't see Anna on here, but we also have Dan Naegle, sales manager at Campbell-Randall Machinery. So we have some people kind of all over in the industry that have a really good perspective of what's happening. And so we're just going to jump right in, honestly. I'm just curious to know, and I think a lot of us are, as a community, as an artisan community, are curious to know, how tariffs can impact the cost of supplies for that artisan community. I'm just going to open it up and we're just going to kind of have a conversation. So whoever feels like they want to start this one off, just jump right in. So impact of cost to, for artisans from your perspective.
From our perspective, I mean, I think everybody dealt with this being extremely volatile. And early spring, it looked like it could be really dramatic. And we had, I'm trying to think of the timing here, maybe April, we had some of the 145% scenario that was imposed on China. If that would have stuck, it would have been really dramatic. So with that being paused, what we're seeing now that would have the biggest impact is really around, in our case, hardware, the metal, the steel and aluminum tariffs. There's still 50%, and that's global, unless you're able to find those products domestically. So again, who knows what could change in the next couple of days or months, but what we're seeing today, there's a pretty significant impact to hardware.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed, because that stuff isn't made on shore. It really, it is, but it's very, very expensive.
Yeah, and there's some that you can find on shore, but when we're dealing in literally thousands of, buckles, snaps, rings, and Ds, and it's these small widgets, it's difficult in the way for some of those products that you don't move a whole lot of. So it's a difficult product to insource, and without being able to find a non-domestic source that's not tariff impacted, it's just inevitably those are going to get more expensive.
Yeah, agreed. Drew and Adam, I'm interested to hear your perspective on what's happening with leather.
Yeah, our exposure to things coming from abroad isn't quite as significant as, something that's, a metal product, for example. And so one of our biggest inputs, hides, we're sourcing 100% of our hides from the US. Um, and what's been something that's kept things more or less level for us is that we're buying the premium hides. So we're buying jumbo heavy native steers, no brands, and we're working with a few key suppliers on that who are able to get us what we need. And so while there are other types of hides that are being used in other products, and those are going overseas, and there was some rocky times when we had the tariffs that Marshall was just describing with China earlier this year. Our hide supply was more or less consistent. Um, we do have inputs that are coming in the form of the vegetable tannins that we're using. Those are not produced in the U.S. We have to get those from overseas, and so we are exposed to the tariffs that are in place right now, 10% on things like that. And then anytime that we're trying to make purchases for equipment for the tannery, we'd like to source that from the US, but sometimes it's just not available. And so when that happens, we're having to look overseas. And so that's getting subjected to the tariffs as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think sometimes as artisans, we think, well, Hermann Oak, and we know that you source all of your hides onshore, but sometimes maybe we just don't quite know exactly what you're trying to source offshore and how that can impact cost eventually, or if, I think sometimes we just don't think about those things. Dan, I'd love to hear your perspective as well, because machinery is definitely an area where these tariffs have impacted parts and pieces. Anyways, go ahead.
It's complex. Early on, I thought we were going to be safe from any kind of tariff impact because we do a little bit of manufacturing here in Texas, but majority of our equipment and part supply is coming out of Europe, primarily Italy. So we don't have huge margins. We're not in the retail game. We're supplying factories. So we have expensive machines and a small margin to make a profit. And so if a tariff comes in like a 10%, that's a big hit to a profit margin. We had some customers with machines on the water that got impacted that we unaware that this was happening. On top of that, we're also playing an exchange rate game. So the dollar has fallen against the euro. So you're seeing things getting more expensive. On the products that we do manufacture, we source, of course, in metals and materials here, but it's a worldwide supply chain. So we have specialty metals that maybe they produce them in Germany, or maybe you can produce it here in the U.S., but there's still a finite demand. They can't produce the world's supply here in the U.S. So everything is starting to go up because of that. And then I think the hardest part was a realization that it's an interwoven supply chain. So even though I'm ordering, say, machine parts from Italy, those motors can be made in Taiwan, Hong Kong, sensors and electronics and everything else. And so a product that was 100 euro all of a sudden just shot up in price. And it's hard to explain that to the customer in the end that we're not trying to take advantage of the situation, but it's completely unpredictable. And we're finding that even though we've had quotes out, we're having to go back and say, this is what's going on. We're going to be completely transparent. And that's how we've written it out. We've had to separate the costs so that the customers can understand where the expenses are going. And I think the fallout of all that is manufacturing in general is kind of a wait and see. And they're not putting a lot of investment into equipment until they know, at least have some predictability what the market's going to do, and they know what their prices are going to be at.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Having to juggle those unknowns, because that is tricky. That is, like you said it in the beginning, very complex, because even though you're getting this this item from this country, but they're actually, it's actually made over here. So how is that trickling down into, once it reaches you and it gets in somebody's machine? Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Brayden and Adam have a little bit of a different perspective on this. I mean, Adam's really working directly with suppliers in the industry, carriers of the product, right? And Brayden kind of representing that client. I'd love to hear your guys' perspective as well. I mean, Adam, like what is the narrative that you're talking to your clients about, that are selling Hermann oak leather, and how is that narrative being received, and has it impacted any, sales for you? And then Brayden on that other end, then, with Brayden's my husband. I'm sure you all, maybe some of you know that, but we own Maker's Leather Supply. And so we then are, the consumer aspect, and we have all of that perspective as well. So I'm interested to hear from you, Adam, then Brayden.
Yeah, like everybody was saying, at the very forefront of it, we it was complex to say the least. And one of the things that we've done in the history of Hermann Oak is try to be upfront, communicate. So we actually tried to communicate early and often, and we put out a letter basically saying we don't know what's about to happen. We don't know, but we can commit to you that what we've always said we'll do is take care of you. We don't know what that looks like, but we'll be transparent with cost and any changes in our supply chain. We talked about hides, and most people assume that our hides are such a large part of the input in the process. But one of the things that Drew has mentioned is we have to supply source materials. The extract, our extract isn't made in the U.S. Any vegetable tannin extract that is used is from Argentina and South Africa. So there's a lot of inputs. So we didn't know what would come of it. So we just tried to communicate early. And as far as an impact on the actual sales, what we tried to prevent was that fear and panic buying, where consumers would say, I don't know if I'll be able to get this, so I need to buy 10 times more than I need. Well, that puts a constraint on anybody that, our regular consistent customers. We didn't want, I think Tom Everly, our CEO, put it this way: this could be COVID on steroids, right? People could come in and just panic buy because they just don't know, and they're 2 years removed from seeing it get really, really bad. Yeah. So we just tried to get out in front of that, communicate, ensure that our customers knew we'd take care of them. We would be a good steward of the resources we had and try to take care of them. We would try to mitigate costs as best we could throughout our business, so that we could try to absorb any tariffs that we could. We're not a fan or proponent of mid-year price increases, so we didn't want to have to do that. We like to stay on a pretty consistent cycle and make sure that people have advanced notice of when those price increases are coming. Fortunately, we've been able to maintain some pretty stable pricing. Like Drew mentioned, we're not as exposed as some that are buying the 50%, 140, but we still have those increases. So I would say, just as a general rule, we've just tried to communicate, and this is one of those opportunities that we have to communicate that. But as far as an impact on sales, like I said, the main thing was just there was some upfront. There was some upfront buying, some people that just wanted to stay out in front of it. But our main statement was, we just want you to know we're going to take care of our customers.
Yeah.
Whatever that looks like, we're going to do that.
Yeah. I mean, Brayden is a customer. We buy a lot of Hermann oak. We buy a lot of stuff. Well, We have dance machines. We have lots of Weaver stuff as well. I mean, we are a client of all of you. I mean, so like from that perspective, you know, um, what what were your thoughts? What were your insights? And then how also, I think it's really important because most of the people on this call are actually artisans. You know, you're the consumer of the goods, and how, you know, how is that narrative being conveyed to them from your perspective?
Sure. And well, I'll say from COVID to inflation to now tariffs, one thing that we realized as a company that we didn't do a good job of, and I think our whole industry doesn't do a great job of this, is having some form of dynamic pricing strategy, you know, that can fluctuate a little bit more with demand. So we would see margins erode and then sometimes have to have bigger than normal price increases. Like, so it was a little more volatile rather than, you know, those jumps of mid-year were bigger than what they had been in years past, and that created some negative speak. So I think that's one thing we learned is if there's a way for us to be more dynamic in our pricing to weather some of this was better, and it was easier from marketing standpoint to have those smaller increases that we can explain than, or not even have to explain, rather than the big jumps and lose margin before those big jumps. So I think that's one thing that our focus has been on, and I think the consumers as well, if they can be a little more dynamic in their pricing of their leather goods and their direct-to-consumer products. They're used to bearing that. It's when it's a drastic increase that it seems like we got more pushback. And I think what affects us the most is the unknown, the stalling out. There's a lot of expense in stalling out, you know, because right now we're in the middle with makers and expanding into a larger distribution area. And so some of the trades people are stalling out, some of the stuff we need stalling out. Like, it's just taking time. And I will say, we've been on that, okay, let's hold off and see what comes around with the tariffs. So we're running inventory levels in certain categories lower than we normally would. And that's not, it's just not good for business when that cycle gets disrupted and you have that stall. So try to keep things as consistent and keep going, just keep trudging forward, even if you have to increase your prices a little bit to get there. I think that's one of the things we've noticed the most. And then who knows, one thing I kind of worry about and you wait for on the stalling out is the kind of the boomerang effect that happens if there is a drastic easing, right? Like, then there's this big flood of materials that are opened up now or that are now on the marketplace, or for the direct consumer that could mean finished goods, right? If there's a lot more leather goods and stuff now that there's this big influx coming across from overseas that drive prices down, that can affect things. So our thing is be more proactive. You know, we've had to be more. We've been around for 150 years, and there are some of our practices that we get comfortable with that we shouldn't be as comfortable with, and one thing I would say is more dynamic pricing, because the market, almost everybody's doing that. It was in years past, it was like Adam was talking about, the once annual pricing, and you could set your price for the year, but that's not like that from the bulk of the suppliers anymore. So us as craftsmen need to be able to fluctuate and be a little more versatile in pricing to the consumer. So I'd say that's what we've saw on the direct to consumer business. It's really important to have that kind of diversity of supply chain. There's many times mentioned, like, nobody can produce it all. So trying to figure out and keep strong relationships with enough people that you can keep going. And then I think the key to any successful business is being able to pivot. Like, nothing ever runs smoothly, but there's always a way around it. And you may have to change your resources. we're fortunate to have many great craftsmen that do different things. So we have a boot shop and a saddle shop and a silver shop and a hat shop. But there were times during COVID when the supply chain was really disrupted that saddle makers were making belts or making hats because that's what we had supplies for. And we just have to be versatile and be able to adapt and pivot. And I think that's key for those of us who have that direct to consumer business, is that managing those and just having a plan. As long as you're being proactive about it, you'll get something figured out. So I think that's important for I would say for the direct consumer side.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I wonder, and I'm assuming here that there definitely have been some discussions at the corporate level with your companies, Dan, Drew, Marshall, Braydan, where we are, trying to figure out different supply chain, problem solve, alternative sourcing, and possibly even domestic production. And I mean, I'd love to hear if you can even share or have anything to share in regards to that, bulk buying. There are so many different areas and avenues that I would imagine you've been discussing, but that could definitely directly impact our artisan community in that regard as well. So, anyone have any insights into that?
I'll say resourcing has definitely been a big initiative for us in light of all this. And we already had, a fairly broad global sourcing network, but when your hand is forced, we were able to move fairly quickly. Again, in the case of steel right now, steel and aluminum, it being global, you're not necessarily saving any money, but expanding that vendor network, when things do change, you're able to be more nimble and react more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's for a long time felt like it would be wise to shift away from Chinese sources as much as possible. A lot of times there were not cost savings in that, but just knowing that there were some tensions there, even from the first Trump administration, the tariffs that were imposed. So we'd been working at that for a while and expanding our network, but we did move quickly when this started to change on this more recent time. So agreeing with Braydan that you just have to keep your eyes open, even like right now when it's somewhat stable. Keep shopping that vendor network to just see what else is out there. You may be able to find equivalent quality for a similar price, and even if you're not really saving money, to be able to have some other vendors available and in your pocket should things change is just a good move.
Yeah, I agree. So one of our writers, Richard Massey, he did a fairly in-depth article with some of you. As some of you know, he interviewed some of you, and that will publish in our July issue. We really wanted to kind of kick off the conversation here at this level, and then that will be published in the magazine. But one thing that I thought was really interesting that I wasn't aware of, just because I wasn't even thinking of it from that perspective, but it has to do with, I think you said this, Drew, I think you brought this up, but really kind of one of the big issues that you guys are dealing with isn't necessarily, yes, we're all being tariffed for things coming into the US, but some of our counterparts, say Mexico, they're not getting tariffed for what's coming into the US. And that is an interesting dynamic as well, that plays into this whole very complex situation that many of our artisans, they just don't know what they don't know. I didn't even think about that, but now that know that. Now I'm looking at other avenues where I'm like, ooh, yeah, that's probably happening in this area of industry and this area of industry. And how is that? Those kinds of things that aren't necessarily a direct impact on your company, but definitely a direct impact on, say, a competitor supply chain. So Drew, do you have any more insight into that? I just thought that was so intriguing in the article.
It was really kind of, it was interesting and a little bit frustrating to say, we're a tannery that is really proud to be in the US. And that's important to us. We're, providing good jobs for people in the US. We've been here for almost 150 years. And that's really kind of part of our DNA. And we are operating, our overseas competitors are going to have a cost advantage. The cost of labor for them is going to be less. There might be less environmental regulations. But we focus on providing the high quality leather that we try to produce and satisfy our customers and continue to be competitive. So when these tariffs were announced, we said, this is great. This is something where we're trying to reshore, we're trying to support US manufacturing. So we're hopeful maybe that's something that's going to affect us in a positive way. And unfortunately, it actually has kind of the reverse effect. There was kind of, unintended consequences of this. As I think Adam mentioned, a large cost for us is our tanning extract from the quebracho and the wattle tree. And those you can't get in the US. And so right now we're paying a 10% tariff on both of those when they're coming from Argentina and South Africa. And we know that our overseas competitors aren't having to pay those tariffs on the same tanning extract. But then when they bring their product into the US, that's not getting tariffed because Mexico is under the USMCA, which basically protects them from these tariffs. So it actually gives the Mexican tanneries a cost advantage to us, which is frustrating, but we've got to focus on what we do best and, continue to look for ways to make sure that we're, being competitive and providing a high quality product to our customers. And so that's really kind of what we've doubled down on. It's given us that opportunity to stay laser focused on that.
Yeah, I think one thing that situations, unforeseeable, kind of out of our control situations really helps us do is really, like you said, laser focus on what we do best and really lean into that because that's ultimately what we have control over. And yes, being thoughtful, being strategic, being in the know on what is going on and being smart about the decisions we're making, but not allowing it to consume or even take over who we are at our core and change our company, our the how and why we do things around here. And so anyways, I would like to, I know we're about at time and I continue to say, I think we need to add a little more time to these because these conversations are really, really great. But I just really quickly, I would love to know, and I'd like everybody to chime in here, but just what is your outlook on this situation and, for yourself, for your company, and then also for your customer base. And Dan, let's go ahead and start with you on that one.
I think it's going to be uncertain because maybe the tariffs were an incentive for U.S. domestic manufacturing, but the way it's turning out, it's a tax on everybody. So if they want to motivate manufacturing in the US, they're going to have to add more incentives. There has to be ways that companies can invest to build a factory or to build capacity or to train employees or to get the resources. And that's our main disadvantage. We can try to source all day long, but we're going to the same companies that supply the world. There are many things that we cannot get anywhere else in the world because we've put all our eggs in that basket for so many years. So there's going to be, I think long term, there has to be a change in the way that we do business, that we can have some more diversity. And maybe that's the lesson that needs to be learned here. But that's not going to happen in a matter of months. For example, I had one of my vendors in Italy reached out to me and wanted to know, after the tariffs hit China, do we have any bag companies in the US that has extra capacity that they could build product, or belt companies? And I'm like, no, nobody has extra capacity. Everybody is holding on by the skin of their teeth and trying to be as efficient as possible. So there's no factories that can just turn on overnight. So with that in mind, we don't know what's going to happen in a month, in a week, in a year. So until there's predictability, nobody's going to make a major move, and nobody's going to want to invest in a factory until they know that it's going to be a profitable investment. And so I'm not sure what's going to have to change for that to happen. Consumer mindset, government incentives, more than just a tax on imports. So I think right now we just become tighter with what we do and smarter.
Yeah, man, good point. Yeah. Oof. Anyone else?
I'll jump in from at Burns. What we're doing for the direct consumer side is we're really, like I said, we're working more on dynamic pricing, knowing that pricing is going to be pretty volatile, and we've had big saddle increases. So what we're focusing on is really just building that brand identity and the niche, and really taking care of our core customers so that they'll weather those storms with us. You know, like they'll take some of that blow a lot easier if we're a better partner for them. So I think that's just one thing we're focusing on. It's through the uncertainty, and we've decided we can't let as much margin erode as we have in the past, you know, because we don't know what's going on. So just really building out that, focusing on the brand and the client base, just strengthening those relationships on the direct to consumer side, so that it makes those conversations a little bit easier to understand.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one thing that we all have going for us is that this conversation is such an in your face global conversation that unless you're living under a rock and literally have no idea what's going on, there is some sort of expectation, I would imagine, from the consumer. Like everything is, a price is increasing everywhere. So we do have that going for us, I guess. But I do agree that, you know, just leaning into what we know and what we do best is a good strategy. Drew, Adam, Marshall.
I think your point about costs increasing everywhere is a concern as the year goes on, of where are end consumers feeling this, not in our markets, but as groceries increase or whatever consumer goods go up, there's just a little bit less money to go around. So that could take a little while to play out. It again, the volatility makes all of this difficult. It was hard to decide where to price. We spent an unreasonable amount of time at the beginning of this year on pricing analysis and what do we need to go up on, what do we need to change, and as soon as you have that figured out, you change again. But if things hold and the markets, like prices are just up, what does the consumer do as the year passes on and as we get into holiday seasons and some of those? So there's not a lot that we can do about that at this point, other than, you know, try to keep our prices as reasonable as possible, try to keep margins, try to keep resourcing, and just you have to be really nimble. We're just constantly keeping an eye on what's changing and what can we do about it to keep our prices as reasonable as we can. So it's just going to be a busy year with keeping your eye on everything.
Yeah, we're going to get really good at being adaptive. Adaptivity is going to be our like number one core competency. We're all going to be really, really great at adapting. Drew and Adam.
I think Adam probably said pretty well, the way that we're trying to be as stable as possible with our pricing and be able to communicate any changes in that well in advance. We're not operating a high margin business, and so the tariffs are hurting us, but we're going to continue to move forward. We're we'll, as we get later into the year, we'll start to revisit and say, where do we need to be with our pricing, and to make sure to communicate out any changes that might need to be made. But at this point, we're going to try to keep them as stable as possible and not make any changes.
Yeah, it's great. Adam, any final words?
Yeah, like I said, I just from my end on the sales, going back to who we're selling our leather to, thinking this conversation specifically geared towards the artisan and crafters, a good portion of that customer base doesn't buy directly from us.
Yep.
Right? They're buying through the weavers, through the makers, our distribution network, and that's where I go back to our communication and working with our distribution network to make sure that we're lockstep and communicating all the inputs and the changes that are happening, and just trying to control that so there's some consistency, because there's just so many moving parts in that conversation. So for the people that are buying direct from us, we're able to send those communications out, and it's a little more direct. But we're just trying to manage two different conversations, and that's where we rely on our distribution network and partners there to really help us communicate what it is that we're doing, again, to control those costs and having conversations like this. So
yeah, I think that's crucial at times like this. I mean, I think it brings some trust into those relationships, whether they're supplier relationships, consumer client relationships. Transparency is always good. It just is. And I think sometimes companies shy away from transparency because they don't, maybe being vulnerable with kind of the bumps in the road. It's a little bit, it's hard. It can be challenging, but I think open, honest, transparent communication is really, really great advice. I do, just before we wrap it up, I would just like to kind of circle back to some of our community that's on the call. Thank you so much for being here. And maybe just open it up for if anybody maybe wants to share, how maybe as an artisan, how we can be supportive of our supplier community and help with the transparent communication to the consumer so that the information isn't getting muddled and we're not playing a game of telephone so that the consumer ends up with misinformation. I think there's a lot of that just in general in the leather industry, misinformation. So, it is important that that at the supplier level, we're being transparent with those clients, then they can be transparent to the consumer artisan, then they can be, transparent to their consumer artisan, or their consumer community as well. I guess the question just quickly, and if anybody has anything to say about that from our participants, is, any ideas, has this been helpful is this going to empower you to be able to communicate clearly to your consumer base on what's really happening? And is there, I guess, is there anything else that we can do to help get some more information so you feel maybe better equipped to have these conversations with that consumer client? Anyone? And if no one, that's fine too. Food for thought.
I was just kind of curious if anyone had some, for the very small shop, because, it's as I kind of think through it, it's a lot of these artisans are already squeezing squeezing a rock. And so,
Yeah.
what might be helpful for them to be thinking of in their own business with, okay, our materials costs are going up. And very likely our consumer base is going to be, tightening their wallets. So what do we need to be thinking about to still be here, down the road?
Yeah. Good point.
I mean, I have one thought on that, being around a lot of small shops and being a small shop, hiring a lot of craftsmen. Key there, like when it comes to supplies and materials, is managing cash flow. So keeping an eye on your inventory, like when you're smaller, that's important to manage. Cash flows super important at that point. So managing that, and sometimes maybe we overfocus on small craftsmen, overfocus on materials more than productivity of labor and things like that, which gets them into a bind. So trying to save $20 by buying in bulk may not be the best option, or trying to repurpose every little thing instead of buying something, just buying another one or buying another side, or only buying the part of the hide that you need. I think can be a detriment to smaller shops, is trying not to waste materials but waste a lot of time. I can see that's critical. So find those efficiencies that you can, but know that your time has value. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I see in a small shop, is valuing your time as much as you do your materials. If it takes me so much time to go get this thing to do, like, value that time as much as your materials, I think is what I could see from talking with a lot of craftsmen who have small shops who want to get there. The mentality of like trying to save and hoard everything and reuse sometimes cost them more than what it would be to purchase or just to invest into it. So put equal weight to your time as you do your materials.
Yeah. Good advice. Dan, go ahead.
If I could build on that, 100% agree, but I would say your time is more valuable and your talent is more valuable. So I think so often a small business compares themselves to everyone else in the market, and you try to mimic what they're doing. And you can't do everything that everyone is doing. So you have to find your niche. You have to be very good at it. And you have to find your customers and focus on that, and focus on ways of being very efficient. So you shouldn't be an artisan. You shouldn't be a small shop. You should be a mini factory. Find ways to standardize, duplicate, replicate your process so that you can make more things with less time, and then make more money in doing that. So I think the mentality needs to shift, because there is an art form to this. There's very much a science in manufacturing of doing it efficiently, because you've only got so many hours in the day.
Amen. Very, very, very well said. Well, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you. Thank you very, very much, all of you, for being on the conversation. I do hope that it was valuable. It was certainly valuable to me. I'm excited for the article to be published also in the magazine. It's already shipped, so people will be getting it any minute. So I think go and check that out as well, because there's even just some more in-depth information from our guests here and just some more insight into this giant issue. I think it's an issue. It's just something externally that we're all dealing with and need to have some education on and be aware of. So thank you very, very much, all of you, for joining us. And we look forward to more conversations, hopefully down the road. We'll
Thanks,
let
guys.
everybody get back to their evening and have a good night.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thanks
the
for doing
opportunity.
this. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.